Human relationships form the psychological foundation of our lives. And among all relationships, family bonds are usually the deepest and most emotionally powerful. From the moment we are born, our brain begins to associate safety, belonging, and identity with the people we grow up around. Family becomes our first social system, our first emotional classroom, and often our first experience of love, conflict, loyalty, and disappointment. Because of this deep connection, one of the most puzzling and emotionally intense human behaviors is when someone chooses to cut off their family completely. For many people observing from the outside, this decision can appear shocking, cold, or even ungrateful. Society often assumes that family relationships are permanent and unconditional. Yet in reality, psychology shows us that when someone distances themselves from their family, there's usually a complex emotional history behind that choice. The psychology of people who cut off their family is not about simple rebellion or selfishness. It is usually the result of long-term emotional processes that develop over many years. These processes often involve unresolved conflicts, emotional wounds, identity struggles, or deeply ingrained patterns of behavior within the family system. To understand why someone might take such a drastic step, we must first understand how human psychology develops inside family environments. As children grow up, their brain constantly interprets the emotional signals around them. Support, criticism, affection, neglect, encouragement, or control all leave psychological imprints. These experiences shape how individuals see themselves, how they interpret relationships, and how safe they feel expressing their true identity. Over time, if a person repeatedly experiences emotional pain, invalidation, or psychological pressure within their family, their brain begins to associate family interaction with stress instead of comfort. This does not happen suddenly. Develops gradually through thousands of small moments. A child who feels unheard, misunderstood, or constantly criticized may initially try harder to gain approval. They may become more obedient, more accommodating, or more emotionally quiet in an attempt to maintain harmony. But if the environment continues to dismiss their feelings or reject their individuality, the brain slowly shifts from seeking connection to protecting itself. This protective shift is one of the key psychological mechanisms behind family estrangement. Human beings have a built-in survival system that constantly evaluates emotional safety. When the brain repeatedly detects emotional threat, it begins to activate defense strategies. Some people respond by becoming people pleasers constantly, sacrificing their own needs to maintain peace. Others become emotionally distant, reducing their vulnerability to avoid being hurt again. And in more extreme cases, some individuals reach a point where the healthiest psychological response they can imagine is complete distance. When someone cuts off their family, it is often the final stage of a long internal struggle. It is rarely the first solution a person chooses. Most individuals who take this step have spent years trying to repair the relationship in different ways. They may have tried explaining their feelings, setting boundaries, ignoring conflicts, or adapting their behavior to meet expectations. When those attempts repeatedly fail, the person may start experiencing what psychologists call emotional exhaustion. Emotional exhaustion occurs when the mind becomes overwhelmed by repeated stress without relief. At that point, distance begins to feel like the only remaining path to psychological survival. If we observe the behavior of people who eventually cut off their families, we often notice certain patterns long before the separation occurs. Many of these individuals show signs of internal conflict during family interactions. Their body language may become tense. They may speak less during gatherings, or they may appear emotionally guarded, even when surrounded by relatives. This withdrawal is not necessarily hostility. Instead, it often reflects a subconscious attempt to protect their emotional boundaries. When someone constantly measures their words around family members, it often indicates that they fear judgment, criticism, or misunderstanding. Their brain has learned that expressing certain thoughts may lead to conflict or emotional harm. As a result, they begin to filter themselves carefully. Over time, this filtering creates a psychological burden because the person feels unable to exist authentically in the environment. where they are supposed to feel most accepted. Another behavioral pattern commonly seen in people who eventually distance themselves from family is heightened sensitivity during conversations. They may react strongly to comments that others consider harmless. From an outside perspective, it might seem like overreaction. But psychologically, these responses are usually connected to accumulated emotional memories. When someone has experienced years of subtle criticism or dismissal, even small remarks can trigger deeper feelings of rejection or inadequacy. For example, imagine a person who grew up in a household where their achievements were constantly compared to siblings. Even as an adult, a casual comment about someone else's success may activate old feelings of not being good enough. The emotional response may appear sudden, but it is actually connected to a long history stored in the subconscious mind. Brain does not experience these moments as isolated events. Instead, it connects them to previous emotional patterns. Interestingly, psychologists also pay attention to the behaviors that individuals do not show. Sometimes the absence of certain actions reveals more about a person's internal state than their visible reactions. For instance, if someone avoids sharing personal milestones with their family, it often suggests that they do not expect emotional support or validation from them. The decision not to share important life events indicates that the person has learned that vulnerability in that environment may lead to disappointment or criticism rather than encouragement. Similarly, when a person rarely seeks advice from family members, it may signal that they do not perceive those relationships as psychologically safe. Humans naturally seek guidance from people they trust emotionally. When that trust is missing, individuals begin to rely more on friends, mentors, or their own judgment instead. One of the most misunderstood aspects of family estrangement is the emotional struggle experienced by the person making the decision. Cutting off family rarely brings immediate relief. In many cases, it creates an intense mixture of freedom, guilt, grief, and uncertainty. Humans are biologically wired to seek belonging within their family group. When that connection is broken, the brain may interpret it as a loss similar to mourning. Even if the relationship was painful, it still represented a familiar part of the person's identity. This psychological conflict can create internal dialogue that lasts for years. The person may question whether they made the right decision, may wonder if things could have been different. At the same time, they may remember the emotional patterns that led them to step away. This push and pull between relief and guilt is a common emotional experience in family estrangement, real life. Examples of this psychology can be seen in many everyday situations. Consider someone who grows up in a family where career choices are heavily controlled by parental expectations. If that person chooses a different path, they may face repeated criticism or pressure to conform. Over time, they may start avoiding conversations about their work because each discussion turns into an argument. Eventually, the constant tension may make them feel that maintaining distance is the only way to protect their sense of identity. Another example involves emotional neglect. Not all painful family environments involve obvious conflict. Sometimes the problem is the absence of emotional connection. A child who grows up in a household where feelings are rarely discussed may struggle to develop secure attachment patterns. As an adult, they may feel that conversations with family remain superficial and emotionally empty. Even if there is no open hostility, the lack of meaningful connection can create a sense of loneliness that pushes the person to seek deeper relationships elsewhere. Psychologically, individuals who cut off family often develop strong boundary awareness. Boundaries are the invisible psychological lines that protect a person's emotional and mental space. When boundaries are repeatedly ignored during childhood or adolescence, the individual may eventually learn to enforce them more strictly. As an adult, in some cases, complete separation becomes the only boundary that feels effective. Body language can also reveal subtle signs of unresolved family tension. During family interactions, a person experiencing psychological discomfort may display closed posture, limited eye contact, or short responses. These signals often indicate that the individual is trying to minimize emotional exposure. Their nervous system may remain in a heightened state of alertness, anticipating criticism or conflict even if none occurs in that moment. On the other hand, when someone feels emotionally safe with people outside their family, their behavior often changes noticeably. They may become more expressive, relaxed, and open in conversations. This contrast between different social environments provides important insight into how psychological safety shapes human behavior, despite the relief that distance can sometimes bring. Family estrangement can also produce significant psychological side effects. One of the most common consequences is chronic guilt. Society places strong moral expectations on family loyalty, and individuals who break those expectations may internalize feelings of shame. They may constantly worry about being judged by others or being labeled as ungrateful or disloyal. Another common emotional struggle is identity confusion. Family relationships often play a major role in shaping how people understand themselves. When those relationships disappear, individuals may feel uncertain about their role in the world. Questions like, "Who am I without this family connection?" can create deep internal reflection. Loneliness can also become a long-term challenge. Even if the family relationship was painful, it still represented a built-in social network. Without that network, individuals may need to build alternative support systems through friendships, partners, or chosen communities. While many people successfully create these new connections, the process can take time and emotional effort. In some cases, unresolved family trauma may continue influencing a person's behavior even after separation. Example, someone who grew up in a highly critical environment may carry self-doubt into other relationships. They may become overly cautious about sharing opinions or pursuing ambitious goals because their subconscious mind still anticipates negative judgment. From a psychological perspective, professionals analyze family estrangement through several observation methods. One common approach is examining the person's narrative about their past experiences. Psychologists listen carefully to how individuals describe family interactions, focusing not only on the events themselves, but also on the emotional meanings attached to them. Another technique involves identifying recurring thought patterns. For example, someone frequently expresses beliefs such as "my feelings never mattered" or "I was never good enough." These statements reveal deep emotional schemas formed during childhood. Schemas are mental frameworks that shape how individuals interpret future experiences. Psychologists also observe emotional triggers. When certain topics related to family provoke strong reactions, it often indicates unresolved emotional memories. These triggers can reveal where the deepest psychological wounds exist. Understanding these patterns helps therapists guide individuals toward healing and emotional clarity. Body language and behavioral patterns during discussions about family are also carefully analyzed. Some individuals may become visibly tense, avoid eye contact, or change the subject quickly when family topics arise. These nonverbal signals often provide clues about hidden emotional stress. Ultimately, the psychology of people who cut off their family is not a story of simple rejection. It is usually a story of survival, identity, and emotional boundaries. Behind every estrangement decision lies a unique history of experiences, perceptions, and personal struggles. Some individuals eventually rebuild relationships after years of distance, while others maintain separation as a necessary part of protecting their mental well-being. Understanding this psychology requires empathy rather than judgment. Human behavior is rarely as simple as it appears on the surface. When someone chooses distance from their own family, the decision often reflects a deeply personal journey through pain, reflection, and self-preservation. By examining these patterns through the lens of psychology, we begin to see that estrangement is not always about abandoning connection. Sometimes it is about reclaiming the right to exist emotionally, authentically, and peacefully in one's own life.